On that rainy night, when thunder tore through the sky and the raindrops hit the roof with force, Lara, just 17 years old, saw her life fall apart. Her father, his face hardened with anger and disappointment, shouted words she would never forget. In a matter of minutes, she was outside the house with a backpack on her shoulders, wet clothes, and a broken heart. The scene was worthy of one of those movies she used to watch as a child, but now it was her reality. The cold of the night seemed to punish her even more, as if the whole world had turned against her as she walked through the dark streets. Her feet sinking into puddles, Lara tried to understand how everything had come to this point. Just a few weeks before, she believed her life was under control. She had plans for the future, dreamed of going to college, had friends, and most of all, believed in love. But everything changed when she discovered the pregnancy. Her boyfriend, upon hearing the news, vanished as if he had never existed. And now her own father, the man who was supposed to protect her, was the one responsible for throwing her out onto the streets. With every step she took, Lara's mind filled with memories. Family Sundays, the advice her father always gave, the promises that he would never abandon her. All of that now seemed like one big lie. The fear of the future, the fear of being alone, and the despair of not knowing where to sleep that night consumed her from the inside. The tears mixed with the rain, and the urge to scream was suffocated by the pain as she wandered through the city. Lara looked at every lit window, imagining what it would be like to be inside, in a warm, safe home, with people who loved her. She knew she couldn't count on many. The neighbors had always been distant. Her friends now seemed like ghosts from the past. All she had left was herself and the child growing inside her. The responsibility felt heavier than she could carry. In the middle of her despair, a memory surfaced in Lara's mind. Nora, an old friend of her mother's, who lived just a few blocks away. The two hadn't seen each other in years, but Lara knew that if there was any chance for shelter, it would be with her. Without thinking twice, she headed toward that small blue house on the corner, praying that Nora was still there and that she could help. When she arrived, Lara hesitated before knocking on the door. The fear of rejection was almost as strong as the fear of the night. But in the end, she gathered her courage and gave 3 firm knocks. Minutes that felt like hours passed until the door finally opened, revealing Nora's aged but welcoming face. Without saying a word, Nora pulled her inside, offering a towel and the embrace Lara so desperately needed. As she dried off, Lara began to tell everything. From the moment she discovered the pregnancy to her father's violent reaction. Nora listened in silence, her eyes full of compassion. After a few minutes, she simply said, "You won't go through this alone." Those words fell on Lara like a balm, bringing a bit of hope amidst the chaos. But what Lara didn't know was that, on that same night, her father was sitting in the living room at home, staring at an old photo of her as just a child. The silence in the house, once comforting, now felt suffocating. He remembered every moment, every smile, every achievement of Lara, and for the first time since the argument happened, a solitary tear rolled down his face. While Lara tried to sleep on Nora's small couch, her father remained awake, battling with his thoughts. Pride and anger fought with love and guilt inside him. He knew he had overreacted, knew he had acted on impulse, but the fear of seeing his daughter repeat her mother's mistakes was stronger than any reasoning. Still, something inside him was starting to change. On the other side of the city, Lara, lying with her eyes open, stared at the ceiling, her heart tight. She knew life from that point on wouldn't be easy. But deep down, something told her that this story was far from over. And what was coming? No one could imagine. If you think you already know how this is going to end, wait until you discover the events fate still had in store for Lara and her father. Stay with me until the end and get ready to be surprised by what's coming next. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains of the living room where Lara had spent the night. She had barely managed to sleep, but the little rest she got was enough to calm her thoughts a bit. Nora welcomed her with a hot cup of coffee and a worried look, but without asking too many questions. Lara felt that, at that moment, what she needed most was silence and understanding. While having her coffee, Lara picked up her phone and saw several missed calls from an unknown number. Her heart raced. Could it be her father? Was he feeling remorseful? But the fear of being disappointed again kept her from returning the call. She put the phone aside and decided to focus on the next step, finding a job. She knew that depending on Nora for too long wouldn't be fair. With Nora's help, Lara got an interview at a small bakery in the neighborhood, even with her tired face and her belly starting to show the first signs of pregnancy. She made an effort to appear confident and responsible. The owner, a middle-aged man named Samuel, saw something in her that moved him. He offered her a job as a shop assistant, starting immediately. As Lara began to adapt to her new routine, her father, Carlos, remained caught in his own internal battle. He could barely concentrate at work. At home, the silence was deafening. Lara's clothes were still in the wardrobe, her bedroom remained untouched, and every corner of the house seemed to carry her absent presence. He spent hours staring at the door, waiting for her to come back at any moment, like she used to after school. Days went by, and his regret only grew stronger. Carlos tried several times to call, but each attempt ended before the first ring. Pride was still a difficult barrier to overcome, until one day he received an unexpected visit. Samuel, the bakery owner, knew Carlos by sight, as they had lived in the same neighborhood for years. Aware of the situation, Samuel decided to take action. Arriving at Carlos's house, Samuel got straight to the point. He told him that Lara was working at the bakery, that she was making an effort to support herself, and that despite everything, she seemed determined to move forward. Samuel's words hit Carlos like a punch to the stomach. The thought of his daughter, still so young, facing the world alone made him rethink all his actions. That very night, Carlos took his car and drove to the bakery. He parked across the street, watching Lara through the shop window. She served the customers with a forced smile, but the exhaustion was visible on her face. Carlos realized that, despite the strength she showed, his daughter was suffering. The urge to go in and hug her was strong, but the shame and fear of being rejected held him back. In the following days, Carlos kept watching from afar. Each time he saw her, his regret deepened. Until one late afternoon, when he saw Lara stumble while carrying some heavy boxes, he couldn't take it anymore. He ran from his car and crossed the street, getting close to her before he could even think of what to say. He simply held her in his arms, helping her regain her balance. Lara, realizing it was her father, froze. For a few seconds, the two of them stood there, motionless, just staring at each other. Her first instinct was to scream, to push him away, just as he had done to her. But looking into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine remorse. Carlos tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He just lowered his head, took a deep breath, and with a trembling voice said, "Forgive me, daughter. I was an idiot, a coward. I failed you. I failed both of us." The silence that followed was broken only by the tears running down Lara's face. She didn't say anything at that moment. She simply turned her back and went back inside the bakery, leaving her father standing on the sidewalk, his heart even heavier. But at that instant, something had changed between them. A first step had been taken. In the days that followed, Carlos started going to the bakery every day, not to force a conversation, but just to be nearby. He sat at one of the outside tables, ordered a coffee, and watched Lara work. Little by little, that gesture began to break the barrier between them. One day, Lara brought him a glass of water. She didn't say a word, just placed the glass on the table and went back to the counter. But that small gesture meant the world to Carlos. It was the sign he had been waiting for. The sign that, despite everything, there was still hope to rebuild what had been broken. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes. Lara continued with her work routine at the bakery, while Carlos maintained his constant presence, always sitting at the same table, with the same coffee and his eyes fixed on her. The neighborhood began to notice his behavior. Some customers made comments, others just watched in silence. But for Lara, each day was a mix of feelings. Her wounded pride still spoke loudly, but deep down, she couldn't ignore her father's silent persistence. One afternoon, when business at the bakery slowed down, Samuel approached Lara with a serious look. He told her that Carlos had been there earlier, asking about her schedule. Samuel, a good observer of life, knew that this father was fighting against his own pride. Sometimes time doesn't heal, daughter, but true regret. That makes a person really change, he said before returning to the counter. Samuel's words kept echoing in Lara's mind. She wondered how much she could trust this sudden change in her father, the man who weeks ago had thrown her out of the house with such harsh words now seemed like a stranger desperate for forgiveness. However, the pain was still fresh, and the wound too deep to close so quickly. On a cold night, as Lara was closing the bakery, Carlos, who as usual was sitting across the street, gathered his courage and crossed over. He asked to talk. For the first time, Lara didn't refuse. They sat on a bench in the nearby square and stayed silent for a few minutes, just listening to the sound of passing cars and leaves being carried by the wind. Carlos, with a low voice and a distant look, began to tell her things Lara had never heard before. He spoke of the fear he felt when he learned about the pregnancy, the panic of seeing her repeat the mistakes he saw in other families, and the despair of not knowing how to act. He admitted that his reaction was the worst possible, that he acted like a coward, and that since that day, he hadn't been able to sleep properly. He told her how he spent nights staring at the door, waiting for her to walk through it at any moment. Lara listened to everything without interrupting, but her gaze remained hard. Her father's words were important, but the scars on her heart still weighed heavily. When he finished, she took a deep breath and simply said, "You hurt me in ways I can't even explain. But I'm not going to hate you, Dad. I just need time." The conversation ended there. Carlos returned home with a mix of relief and sadness. But for the first time, he felt there was a small chance to rebuild the relationship with his daughter. He knew he couldn't rush things. Meanwhile, Lara faced another challenge. Her pregnancy was advancing, and with it, her worries increased. Nora, always helpful, accompanied Lara to her medical appointments. Each ultrasound was a mix of joy and fear. Seeing the baby's little face in the first images stirred her emotions. A life was growing inside her, making everything even more real. At one of these appointments, the doctor warned her about some risks. Lara's blood pressure was unstable, and she would need constant monitoring. The stress and physical strain were affecting her health and the baby's. The news left Lara even more worried. Working so many hours at the bakery was becoming dangerous. Upon hearing about the situation from Samuel, Carlos made a decision. Even without knowing how she would react, he went to the bakery, asked to speak with her, and handed her a letter. In the letter, with shaky handwriting, he said that regardless of her response, he had rented a small apartment for her near Nora's house. The place was furnished and ready to welcome her if she wanted. When Lara read the letter, she couldn't hold back her tears. The idea of having a place of her own, safe, and close to people who cared about her was something she hadn't even imagined in her best dreams at that moment. But pride was still there, pulsing, screaming at her not to give in so easily. So she put the letter in her bag and decided she needed to think it over. The following days were filled with indecision. Lara kept working, but every night, as she lay on the couch at Nora's house, She looked at the letter and wondered if she should accept that gesture. The fear of being disappointed again was strong, but the desire to give her baby a better life was starting to speak louder. It was on a silent early morning that she made her decision. She picked up her phone and with trembling fingers sent her father a simple message. "Can we talk tomorrow?" When Carlos woke up and read that message, his heart raced. He knew this could be the beginning of a new chapter. He didn't sleep anymore that night, just lay staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing every word he would say to his daughter the next day. Their meeting happened at the bakery itself, before business hours began. Sitting at the same table as always, with 2 coffees between them, Carlos listened to Lara carefully. She spoke about her fears, about the pain she felt, and about the need to build a relationship based on respect and understanding. She made it clear that forgiveness wouldn't be immediate, but she was willing to try. With tears in his eyes, Carlos held her hands and promised, with all sincerity, that he would do everything he could not to disappoint her again. They both knew the road would be long, full of ups and downs, but there, at that moment, a new bond began to form. A bond that, until then, had seemed impossible. The following days marked a new phase in Lara's life. She decided to accept the apartment her father had prepared. The first time she entered the small space, she felt a mix of relief and fear. The place was simple but cozy. There was a new couch, a comfortable bed, and even a crib already assembled in a corner of the bedroom. Carlos had thought of every detail, and somehow, that deeply moved her. As Lara organized her things in the new home, the neighbors began to notice her presence. The lady from the floor below, Mrs. Agnes, soon made a point of bringing over a basket with fresh fruits and bread. Small gestures that, little by little, made Lara feel less alone. Even with the new home, Lara continued working at the bakery, but now with reduced hours as per medical advice. In the afternoons, she took short walks around the neighborhood, and at night, she wrote letters to the son she hadn't yet met. She wanted him to know one day everything she went through to bring him into the world. Carlos, in turn, made a point of visiting his daughter every day. Sometimes he brought groceries, other times he just stopped by to see how she was. The fear of invading her space was still there, but he preferred to risk being overprotective than being absent. On one of these visits, when entering the apartment, Carlos found Lara unconscious on the living room floor. Panic took over him. Without wasting time, he picked her up in his arms and rushed to the nearest hospital. During the ride, his mind filled with terrible thoughts. What if something happened to her? What if the worst happened to the baby? At the hospital, the doctors acted quickly. Lara was in a dangerously high blood pressure state and would need to stay hospitalized for an indefinite period. The diagnosis was preeclampsia, a serious complication, especially in young pregnancies. Carlos stayed by her bedside every day. With each new exam, with each new diagnosis, he felt more helpless. Seeing his daughter there, fragile and vulnerable, made all the past mistakes and distances feel even more painful. He held her hand while she slept, and when no one was looking, let the tears fall. It was on one of those mornings, while waiting for news in the waiting room, that Carlos received a visit from someone unexpected, Lara's ex-boyfriend. The young man, visibly nervous, said he had heard about the hospitalization and wanted to see her. Carlos, filled with a mixture of anger and protectiveness, stared at him coldly. Without mincing words, he made it clear that this was not the time, and that, if the boy really cared, he would have been present long before. Hearing the conversation through the slightly open door, Lara woke up. Weak but conscious, she asked to see him. They had a quick conversation, full of silences and loaded looks. The boy apologized, said he regretted everything, but Lara, with a low and firm voice, simply said, "Now I just need peace. For me, and for my child." As the days passed, Lara's condition slowly improved. However, the doctors decided to induce labor early to avoid further risks. The news caught everyone by surprise. Carlos stayed by his daughter's side during all the preparations. The fear was great, but he knew she was strong. The day of the birth was tense. While Lara was taken to the operating room, Carlos waited. Outside, pacing back and forth with sweaty hands and a racing heart. The hours seemed endless. When the doctor finally came out with the news that the baby had been born healthy and that Lara was also out of danger, Carlos broke down. He cried like he hadn't cried in a long time. It was as if, at that moment, all the weight of the past weeks had been lifted from his shoulders. When visits were allowed, Carlos entered the room and saw his daughter holding the baby in her arms. Lara's gaze was tired but carried a quiet happiness. She looked at her father, smiled faintly, and said, "His name will be Gabriel." Carlos approached, gently touched his grandson's little face, and with a trembling voice said, "Welcome, my little angel." From that day on, their lives would never be the same. Gabriel's birth brought a new purpose for both of them. Lara, now a mother, found strength where she thought none existed. And Carlos, now a grandfather, became the greatest protector of that little being. The scars of the past were still there, but little by little, they were being covered by new moments, new memories, and above all, by a love that, despite all difficulties, had never ceased to exist. The following months were a true emotional rebuilding for everyone involved. Lara, now divided between the tasks of being a mother and the challenges of restarting her life, showed a strength that surprised even herself. Every sleepless night, every cry from little Gabriel, every doctor's appointment, everything served as a reminder that she had won battles that, not long ago, seemed impossible. Carlos, on the other hand, became an even more present figure. The mornings started with him bringing fresh fruit and milk for Lara. The afternoons, when he could, were dedicated to strolls with his grandson. Little by little, the whole neighborhood began to notice a transformation in that man who was once known for his rigidity. The neighbors began to greet him with more sympathy, and even Samuel, always discreet, made a point to praise the visible change in his behavior. Lara, looking at her father interacting with Gabriel, often found herself getting emotional. That man, who once seemed like a stranger, now showed such genuine love that it was impossible not to be moved. But even with the displays of affection, she never forgot the lessons life had taught her. She knew that forgiveness was a process, not a single event. There were still pending conversations, stored pain, but there was also a firm decision within her to build a future without letting the past define her. On a sunny afternoon, sitting on the bench at the same square where they had their first honest conversation, Carlos, looking at the horizon, said, "Daughter, you gave me a second chance. I know I didn't deserve it, but you gave it to me." Lara smiled slightly, took a deep breath, and replied, "Maybe you didn't deserve it, but I needed to forgive to be able to live in peace." From that day on, the two established a new kind of relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. No pretending, no masks. Just a father trying to be better and a daughter learning to trust again. Gabriel, growing up surrounded by this environment of overcoming, became the strongest link in this new story they were building. And for those looking from the outside, maybe it all seemed like just another ordinary father and daughter story. But for those who lived through every tear, every sleepless night, and every silence loaded with feelings, it was much more than that. It was proof that, even after the worst mistakes, it's possible to start over. So, if you've made it this far, remember one thing: the strongest bonds don't always come from perfect love. Many times they are born from the scars life leaves behind. If you've also gone through a moment of reconciliation or are still waiting for one, share your story in the comments. Your experience may inspire others who are going through something similar. And if this video touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. Here, every story has a purpose, and the next one could be yours.